Welcome back to Two Glasses and a Movie. This is Connor.
And this is Tanner, and we have another kind of good, not good, bad movie for you.
Yeah, bad movie is probably a good way to put it. So this week we'll be talking about Gigli. It rhymes with really. Really a good way to remember it. So we'll be talking about this movie today. So before we dive in, though, I wanted to give a shout out to a friend Reagan about last month's podcast that talked about Showgirls, and he brought up a really good point that the director was potentially going for a satire of the movie and really poking fun at the Las Vegas scene, and that made a lot more sense with the movie. I didn't really read that in any articles and stuff that I looked up, but that makes sense after looking back and watching the movie. That does make a lot of sense. So appreciate that kind of nugget from him. Always want to learn something new and get some new knowledge about a movie, so appreciate that. So Tanner, why did you want to do this movie?
Well, similar to Showgirls, this just is something that I've heard on lists before of a well-known bad movie. It has, I think, a 2.6 when I looked on IMDb, which is prime category for officially a bad movie. But then secondly to that, it's Ben Affleck and it's Jennifer Lopez, either in their first prime or, at the beginning of them really starting to be well-known actors. And so that adds to just the lore of this movie of we like both of these people most of the time. They do good acting most of the time. What is it that happened? What went wrong? And this was after something big like Good Will Hunting, something like that where, it was a Ben Affleck movie. I go back and forth sometimes nowadays on like, is he a good actor or is he just a guy that's there? But at this time, he had done some stuff where I was like, he's a notable actor. So what went wrong? That's the big draw for this one. And hopefully, we'll have some ideas overall on what went wrong.
Gigli Ben Affleck, is ordered to kidnap the psychologically challenged younger brother of a powerful federal prosecutor. When plans go awry, Gigli's boss sends in Ricky, Jennifer Lopez, a gorgeous, free-spirited female gangster who has her own set of orders to assist with the kidnapping. But Gigli begins falling for the unavailable Ricky, who could be a hazard to his occupation. So that's a synopsis of Gigli. And like Tanner mentioned, Ben Affleck and J-Lo are in this, but also Justin Bartha, I think that's how you say his last name, and a surprise appearance from Christopher Walken and Al Pacino that were both in it in one scene, and maybe could have been a little bit better if they had some more scenes and some more screen time. But Tanner, what were some of your takeaways and just things you noticed throughout the movie?
Yeah, I had not looked at the full cast list, I don't think. So both of the times that those guys popped up, it was surprising. I think as you watch the scene, it's even more surprising because Christopher Walken's character seemed pretty unimportant. It seemed like one of the probably many moments that they could have just cut. He's a cop. He is maybe investigating. Maybe he's talked to Gigli at different times in the past. But it was such a short scene, and it didn't really come back. So yeah, I'm going to just start with a couple big thoughts that I had. Once again, I probably wrote 6 pages of notes. I did not pause every 15 seconds like I did in Showgirls, because I did not want to extend the movie. And overall, I was not having a good time. I think our big conclusion towards the end will be this movie isn't horrible bad, like there's so many things that go wrong. It's just boring bad, where not really a lot happens, and then eventually you're like, it's over. Thank goodness. So I think my first bullet point, for me, watching throughout the whole thing, the plot is pretty vague. Louis is the sort of contact character that Ben Affleck's character Lewis is like his boss, I guess. And it's pretty unclear what Lewis is exactly. This movie has some of the aspects of a mob movie, I guess, but you don't see any other part of the mob. You don't see anything about a hierarchy. There are no other characters. This seems to be, the criminal underworld, etc. But there's not any real description of who it is, what's happening with that. So, what's the deal with that? What type of organization is this, I guess? Secondly, early on in the movie, Gigli, Ben Affleck's character, uses the word contractor about himself. He says that he is a contractor and he's paid to do this job. Well, they don't define what that means in their organization. So, is he... And he has done jobs like this for Lewis before. Is he a hitman? Is he a kidnapper, primarily? Is he just a guy that takes care of various things when Lewis asks him? It's hard to tell for sure. And that just bothered me. There are these contractors, but they don't really explain what that ever actually means. Next, they kidnap this character. I'm not sure they even call it kidnapping, but that is what happens. He goes to the place where Brian, I believe, which is Justin Bartha's character, where Brian lives. It's a care facility of some type. Brian has a mental disability of some type, which is very vague in this movie. So I'm going to jump into my next kind of overall issue for what makes this movie not work very well in a lot of different ways. So the first thing I just said, the plot is kind of vague. What the organization is it the actual mob of some kind? What is Ben Affleck's actual position? Thirdly, kind of what was the point of this kidnapping? I think they explain it as, we're going to kidnap this judge's brother because our client is supposed to see this judge. This is going to put pressure on the judge in some type of way. But they don't tell us anything about an actual ransom. So we have the question of, does the judge even know that his brother is missing? What outcome is it they want the judge to give because of this kidnapping? There's just a lot of things about those basic points of the plot that were not explained well or were not explained at all. So the overall, what is the point of this movie, is kind of hard to pinpoint because it's unclear. So the second kind of overarching issue that I had is that the tone or the genre or the vibe of this movie is also vague. And so it's a crime movie, kind of, because there's some type of mob connection and there's a kidnapping, but it's not a crime movie. It's not intense in that type of way. It's not dramatic in that type of way. There isn't the other kind of tropes or hallmarks of crime movies where you see him interacting with other criminals, or you see him doing other jobs here and there while he has the main one going on. So it's not really a dramatic crime movie. It's also lighthearted a lot of the time, and there seem to be these moments that are supposed to be comedic or played as jokes, but it's not funny. I didn't laugh probably at all. So if it is supposed to be kind of a comedic crime movie, just a random example, something like Seven Psychopaths is like a kind of comedy crime satire movie that's funny. This wasn't funny, so the jokes don't really work. And then you also have the romantic aspect, which it's not kind of sincere enough for the romance to make sense, and it doesn't play out in a romantic enough way for the romance to make sense. So I think just overall, the tone, there are movies that can hit all of these, that can be, this gritty crime movie and have good jokes that make sense, and it is romantic. This movie tries to hit all those tones, but it misses all of them that it's trying to hit. My next thing that I didn't write down in my bullet points here, but I talk about in a couple other times. I think it fits in with this plot and with this tone issue, is that this movie sort of ends up being a series of a bunch of different monologues that the characters are giving to each other, and is very infrequently actual dialogue or conversations where the different characters are saying a couple sentences to each other and then the other one responds. That's not a good way to do a movie for the most part, because it made it feel very slow, because you're not getting any kind of banter or back and forth or, building of an actual conversation. You're getting these sort of slow, drier kind of monologues where the character is just like, here is some of my ideas and philosophy about stuff, and then the other person waits, and then they do another whole monologue. I will say, I am a big fan of very dialogue-heavy movies where there's maybe not a lot of action. Most especially, I'm a fan of the sort of, quote, walk and talk kind of movie where there isn't a plot. Something like the Before trilogy is something that I really like. So Before Sunset, Before Sunrise. The whole movies really literally are these two characters walking around in a city, having a conversation. And, an older classic movie like My Dinner with Andre, it is two dudes sitting in a booth at dinner, having a conversation. So I think I'm perfectly fine with a movie that is just talking, but the way that this movie tries to do it doesn't work. There isn't enough back and forth, and it's not trying to be that type of movie, so that's where it fails. It's not trying to be a movie that is very heavy on just characters talking. I don't think it's trying to be that, but then it ends up being just one character talking for a long time, and then another one talking for a long time. Kind of with intention, that's what they're supposed to be doing, is just a character talking, or two of them talking. But it's not set up in that type of way, and it's not paced in that type of way. So that makes it not work as that type of movie. One of the notes I wrote, probably, I don't know if it was halfway through the movie, but about halfway through my notes, is I just wrote, there is no drive to the story, like they're just hanging out and nothing else. And so I think I'll circle back to kind of this specific point when we get to the section where we discuss some ways they could fix it, because I think I have an idea that would kind of fit just in with this part. And that's the thing, those were funny moments. It was a good, and I think if they could have played it even better, because it was a funny bit, that he's like, I want a story, and the guy's like, I don't have books here. I'll find something to read, I think I would put that down as one of the most significant plot holes in this movie, is just the way this kidnapping works. So let me lay the groundwork a little bit for people listening that may not have seen it. So Justin Bartha's character is in some type of way mentally disabled. He is living in a facility where he's taken care of a lot of the time, and it's a really important part of the movie that he is some type of handicapped in that type of way. So I actually asked a friend about, there's this character that is portrayed as disabled. What are some ways that we could talk about it? Because, so this movie came out in 2002. And they do use the R word a lot about him, because it's 2002, and there was less, maybe, proper phrases. He is never stated in any type of official diagnosis way that might describe what his disability is. I'm not even sure they use the word disabled. They only use something like they only use types of ways to describe him that are offensive that I don't even want to repeat that much, because it's a 2002 movie. So I think I did find it to be another issue of the kind of vague plot of, I think, just do a little bit better job of kind of describing or explaining something about him. You know, if you want to reference back to other movies that have existed, the pinnacle movie would be like Rain Man, okay? Him having some type of mental disability is a huge plot point, but that movie was 15 years at least before this one, and it's handled better, it's explained better in some type of way, it's not, you know, referred to in, like, offensive ways even that much earlier, I don't think. And so it just ties into this thing of, like, someone needed to just try a little bit harder, add a few more details. And specifically with this, at the very beginning, Ben Affleck goes like, "What's wrong with you? Cut that out." And then later, he's like, "Can't you just be normal?" And again, I know it's 20 years ago. We do have a little more understanding, all this type of stuff. But I thought, even 20 years ago, I didn't think it made sense for Ben to be, like, so confused about the fact that, like, no, he can't be, quote, normal. He has a mental disability of some type. Ben Affleck seemed constantly confused by why that was happening. I guess I shouldn't say that I was, like, maybe surprised that he kept doing that. I think maybe more I just was, like, annoyed, because I was like, yes, this guy doesn't understand what's happening to him. Quit getting mad at him. So, sir, I lost the train of thought of what I was saying, but the kidnapping thing. So he is staying in this facility. Ben Affleck shows up, and he goes up to him, and he's like, "Hey, you're gonna come hang out with me." There's no scene of him signing him out. There's no scene of him talking to the staff for a minute. I guess they just leave. And so Gigli takes him back to his apartment. They're going to stash him there for a couple days. So here are the couple things where this whole write some more details would have made sense. They don't really seem under pressure about the fact that they literally kidnapped someone. That doesn't seem like there's a lot of search being done. One cop comes to his house one time, which there's really no reason, as far as I can tell, that the cop should have even suspected Gigli in the first place. But he does come there. He kind of talks to him. Nothing happens. So yeah, they take him out of the facility pretty easily. That's point one. They take him into public probably 4 separate times to a store, a restaurant, and I feel like that's a pretty big plot hole overall, that if the movie was going to make more sense, they would have exclusively kept him at the house in hiding. They take him out so many times. I think for the movie, it's a huge plot hole that they do this kidnapping, and they're just not secretive about it. Movies that do kidnappings better, usually the people stay hidden. They don't take them out in public multiple times. Yeah, I think that Brian is the most interesting, fun kind of character, and I think there are certainly moments when they make him a caricature in some type of way of how a handicapped person is supposed to act. And I think those moments miss relatively hard. But when they are able to kind of display his just genuine moments, the things that he likes and that he thinks are funny, the times where he is making a joke on purpose, those are the ones that really hit, and you're like, yes. I specifically wrote there's a time where he raps, did he rap It's Tricky, or I Like Big Butts, or something like that, but he's just good at rapping, and it's just kind of you're like, oh, okay, it's a little bit funny, but not in a mean way, where some of the other times when they're trying to make him seem bad are like mean type of jokes. So I'll go into one more just overall big point, kind of from start to finish in the movie, what doesn't work for me. The music they chose, the sort of score of this, is very generic. It's very, like, backgroundy music. It's in all these different scenes, but it almost never adds to any of the scenes. There's not very many songs, if any, that have words. There's not very many, like, they didn't use kind of recognizable pop rock songs, anything like that. They use kind of elevator music, like supermarket background type of music in every scene, and it doesn't make sense usually. They'll kind of put music that is supposed to maybe enhance the, like, romance they're trying to do, but the music isn't really romantic enough, or it doesn't fit. They'll put music that's supposed to be maybe, like, a little funky when they're driving around town or something, but it doesn't fit right. Or in a scene that's supposed to be comedic. I just think overall, the music was very bland, and it didn't make sense sometimes. It didn't build the scenes up. It was just like, hey, we filmed this whole movie. We gotta put some background music over it so it's not just, dead air in the background. That's what the music sounded like. It's not a score. You think of maybe a big sci-fi movie. They wrote a score on purpose to build the movie. You think of a horror movie. It's spooky music. This music feels like they made the whole movie. They're like, we gotta put something over this in the back. I don't know, throw some songs on it. It certainly did not feel like they planned the songs ahead of time, or they, like, really picked songs on purpose that were supposed to enhance the movie. And that's not a great way to do movies, I don't think. So I got one more kind of overall plot point that I think makes this movie bad. And it's that we find out early on in the movie, when J-Lo's character comes in, that she is a lesbian, and that becomes a plot point multiple different times. And then, eventually, for whatever reason, some type of sexual tension does build between these two, and then they kind of end up together at the end. I didn't think any of that made very much sense. I think for this specific movie, she just doesn't need to be a lesbian at all. Because I think it makes the movie less... I think it makes it make less sense of, like... I just didn't understand why. Or in some type of way, they should have, like, stuck to it harder. And then maybe they, like, drive off together at the end because they're a little bit screwed. But she makes it very clear, like, I'm still not interested in you. Something like that, I think, would have made it make more sense as far as why her character is a lesbian. Yeah. And I think that connecting this thing back to the monologues thing, they have this thing where she's like, I'm a lesbian, and he's like, I still like you, and I don't really understand why you'd be lesbians. Dudes are awesome. And he gives, like, a relatively long monologue about, penises and how much he seems to like them or think they're great or something. And she's like, no, the female form is way better. And then by the end, he's like, yeah, I guess you're right. I also like the female form more. It was both of their monologues during those times kind of dumb and kind of unnecessary, because again, those don't relate to the plot at all. It's just the two of them talking so they're trying to build this, like, oh man, how crazy is it that they did like each other by the end. But it was dumb. It didn't make sense, I don't think. Yeah, I think I got a bunch of different little things. Those were kind of my biggest, big plot point issue moments, but I'll just more quickly go through a couple different things. So part of the way this movie wraps up is, the people that are in charge of Ben and J-Lo's contractor characters are like, hey, you gotta, like, cut this kid's thumb off and send it to his brother. That's how we're gonna blackmail him, or whatever. And they're like, well, we don't want to do that, because part of the, I guess, good aspect that I liked the way they portrayed some of this, they grow to like this character, so they don't want to end up doing that. So some of the way the movie is gonna wrap up is they're like, hey, we don't like kind of how this has turned out. This is a good kid. It probably wasn't cool that we kidnapped him. They start to have that, oh, we're going to kind of turn around from these bad guy criminals or whatever. And that was nice, I guess. But it was also added another layer to the just confusion of like, oh, it made this heartfelt turn at the end. But it didn't really feel deserved in that type of way. There wasn't enough. It wasn't like, they didn't seem bad enough at the beginning to kind of have this turnaround of, oh, they're good guy characters at the end. And yeah, so Al Pacino's character shows up, and he is the one who was going to be facing criminal charges, I think. That was the reason they kidnapped this dude. And he's kind of like, I didn't like how Lewis handled this. What are we going to do now? But even that scene that was supposed to be kind of in the climactic part of the movie, it felt underdeveloped, or it just felt like, oh, this guy showed up. I think it's in that scene, he like shoots Lewis in the head. The first like actual violence in this sort of crime-y movie that we have. And then, that scene is just kind of over, and we don't see Al Pacino before that or after that, and the characters go about their way again. I don't know. Another problem, though, is then there's just some other stuff that happens with Ben and J-Lo and whatever. I think that it's another one of those where it's like, just end it on that. We already saw that they're going to kind of let him go. They're not going to hurt him. They're going to go off and just kind of run away and get out of this life. They should have just cut it there, but then there's just some other, it just lingers. Ben Affleck stands up in the parking lot and just watches Brian for, like, probably longer than necessary. And even at the very end, it just kind of doesn't know where to go with the beats. It just lingers a little too long. It took what could have been, it's kind of like, oh man, that was kind of nice, inspiring, heartfelt little ending, and then it just peters it out to something else that's like less impactful, I think. So I think the kind of issues that I had, I would just try to go through and tighten up each of those things a little bit. Here is just an overall compliment I will give. I think that Jennifer Lopez is just a very dynamic force when she comes on screen. You just see her and you're like, that's Jennifer Lopez. She's good. You see her and you're like, okay, this could be good. I think that her acting was relatively better than Ben Affleck's in this. But I think, so a couple things I would fix. I think just add more details. This movie has the feel of, they kind of wrote it on a napkin, like, there will be this contractor, he kidnaps a dude, this girl will come in and kind of make it harder for him, and they'll turn around at the end, And instead of writing like a full script where they include details that make sense, both of the characters are just very kind of vague. Ben is just like the kind of tough guy, but not in an intimidating or actually like scary criminal kind of way. He's just like, oh, I'm tough. She is just kind of hot and like smarter than him, but that's it. The everything is just vague. I would try to just tighten up, add some actual details about more of anything. That for me is the one thing that could just make it way better. Add actual details, flesh out the story itself, even if it hits all the same just major plot points. Explain those points a little better, have them make a little more sense overall.
Okay.